Hello, I'm Mike Cradock and we're going to show you how to change the front and the rear bearing on the Red's R7 motor today after about 20 litres of running. Also we're going to show you how to do a little technique on the return spring for slightly stronger servos, so you get a good return spring using the hairband where you can adjust the tension quite easy. Okay, we have the engine and we're going to show you how to do the return band so the carburetor returns nice and smoothly. What we do is we can change the tension by undoing the knot and moving it closer or moving it away depending on how strong your servo is. We generally set it 3/4 of the length of the carburetor so it's a nice smooth action and a good return, so there's a reasonable tension on it and not too much. So first of all you take the grub screw out. It's already in, comes with your motor. This is an M3 thread and you replace it with a M3 8mm mushroom screw. The reason why you use the mushroom style top is that holds the band on nicely, so you haven't got to put it around the ball joint, obstructing the ball joint and going around your fuel line. So we line that back up with the ball joint. I usually go to the point of the carburetor casing to the ball joint, and that's usually around the right height. Make sure you keep this flush and this and good tension on that. Everything's smooth, working back as it normally is. Then put your band on, put a nice twist around it and go to the main needle, pull that back over. Now keep that out of the way, keep it for neatness. You can put that over the top there like that, and that holds on, and you should get a nice return on the ball joint. And once you've set your linkage and snap your ball joint back on and seated the motor back in, check that it returns under its own steam, and then you'll know whether you got the right tension. But you don't want it straining the servo too much as well when it opens the throttle. So we've disassembled the engine and you can see it's got a beautiful grey line that you're looking for on the piston, a nice carbon. This engine I believe has been running on the Racing Experience, 25% fuel. You can see a beautiful coating of carbon all the way around. It should wipe off with your finger just gently and leave a nice oil trace. You can see the back casing's got a beautiful covering of oil. None of this has been had any after run oil. It's straight from the track, which was used on Sunday I believe. And you can see the ports all nice, a nice film of oil again. Crankshaft, a nice film over that, nice clear in the inside so no dirt getting in. Very good, very nice air filter use there, and you can see a nice carbon build up on the head. So all looks good there. So we'll go on to changing the bearing. You can see some carbon build up and a slight bit of carbon built up on the inside of the bearing. So we'll be taking that out and checking it and then showing you how to replace it. So we have the bearing remover. What this does is it grips on the inside of the bearing. You do this nut up, this expands and holds the bearing. Then you do this up to the back of the casing and undo, and that will pull your bearing hopefully. So we'll put that inside, leave a bit more room so you can hold that in, push that against the bearing, make sure it's seated nicely, then do the bearing up, the clamp up so it's clamping against the bearing. Don't over tighten. Once that's tight, then you get your clamp against that and then just undo, and it should pull your bearing out nicely. You should be able to see it coming out if we do it that way. You should see the bearing gently pulling out of its seating. And then the bearing should just come out nicely. And there you have your bearing removed. So we have the front bearing removing tool. So what you do is take this off obviously, and you've got your clamp, and you need this spacer. So what you do is you put that in to the engine, that'll push against there, put your tool that way so that it pulls against. Gently do that up until you feel them bite, and you hear that click. That's what you want to hear. And it's gently pulling the bearing away from the crankcase, keeping everything straight. And you've successfully moved the bearing. Feel for any smooth running. Bearing feels good condition though for 20 litres, so it's quite good, but I think we'll replace it anyway as we've got the engine apart, and we're replacing it with the ER2 10001 front bearing, and we're replacing the main bearing with the ES2 13151 Reds bearing, and this is ceramic bearing. Just gives you that extra quality and extra life. So we're ready to put the bearings back in now. Just give the bearing holding a clean. You'll see some residue there. Still keep these on. It's always important to keep any debris from going into the engine, even though you have got it apart and in hopefully a clean environment. You never know, something might just fall in there, so it's always a extra safety precaution. And wipe the back out, and that should be ready for your bearing. You shouldn't see any debris or anything that you don't like the look of. Just make sure it's all clean. And the same with the front. Get a famous 3-in-1 oil. It never hurts to over oil anything in the engine. Give that a wipe round, and you can see it's run through to the back already, so just give that a good wipe round as well in the seating. Leave that there for a minute. Take your bearing out. Careful not to catch the bearing with the sharp blade. Remove that from the packaging, and remove your front one same way. Again, not trying to catch the seal or anything like that on the bearing. Most important with this seal. Get some oil on your bearing. Make sure that's all the way around. And the same with your front one. You want everything to glide in nicely and be seated. The oil will burn away, and also helps if there's any dryness when you first start the engine up. Remove your front bearing remover. Place your bearing. Always make sure that you have the bearing with the seal, not the seal but the bearing holder, facing the back of the crankcase, so that it's going in from that direction into the back of the engine. So you put that on your tool first. So you place that into the engine. Make sure everything goes in nice. And you place your front bearing on that, making sure the blue seal is onto the outside. Then you put your nice seating tool there and your clamp on. Make sure everything feels smooth and starts off smooth. It's important, just in case if something doesn't feel right, back off and check it again. It could always, you never know, it could be something in the way or out of line, but this feels very smooth. The oil will help it glide in. And just gently, don't rush it, just gently do it up until you feel it start clamping. Obviously you can see the front bearing going in and the rear bearings going in as well at the same time, and you can feel it tighten up. And just give it sort of just a quarter of a turn after that, just to make sure it's seated, and that's perfect. And then you can back off. And you have your bearings all seated nicely. Make sure they turn nicely, there's no catchiness with the front as well. Oil your crank where the bearing's going to seat, wipe that round, place that in. Make sure it all lines, which is perfectly aligned, there's no thing, and that's sitting nicely. So everything seems in line, all smooth, so it's ready to put your engine back together. Make sure you use your torque wrench at the correct setting. 2.3 on this one, but this was a new one, so it can vary from 2.2 to 2.5 on your torque setting. And so if you refer back to our videos on putting the engine back together, use that procedure, you won't go far wrong. So now we have the engine all back together and it's ready to have the clutch put back on. Refer back to that video. Once you've got it in the car, please start it up on the starter box and just brake in, just warm it up gently for 1 tank of fuel on the starter box. Don't run it in the actual car up and down, just to make sure everything's seated in, and just warm everything up, get it up to running temperature, and then I'm sure the engine will be fine to use as normal because you haven't got to break in any other parts. But it's just nice to get all the fuel around the oil and just seat them in and bed them in for 1 tank at least at running temperature.